August 1959, Ellis County, Kansas. The wheat is standing gold, and the storm is 2 days out. Martha Reyes passed in the spring. Her husband Walt is alone now, staring down 35 acres he has no way of bringing in by himself. The bank draft comes due Thursday. Here's how it happened. It was heavy, it was brittle, it had passed the point of patience days earlier, and every farmer in that stretch of Kansas knew what that meant. Leave it standing through one hard rain, and you don't harvest wheat anymore. You harvest mud and loss. The forecast out of Hays had already started using the word storm, not shower. Walt Reyes was 61, his shoulders still worked fine. His knees had other plans. He had a mule-drawn binder older than his own marriage, and a truck, the color of rust that ran when it felt like it, and beyond that, he had nobody. His son had taken a job at the plant in Salina 2 years back, and Walt had told him to go, meant it, and never once brought it up again. For 38 harvests, Martha had been the second pair of hands in that field, driving the truck slow and steady, while Walt threw bundles, keeping a jug of well water cool under a wet sack, and never letting him quit a row before sundown told him to. Martha had been gone since March. The truck seat sat empty now in a way that felt louder than any sound. Walt looked out at 35 acres of ripe wheat, did the math on one tired body against 2 days and a coming storm, and the math simply refused to work. This land had come from his father, who'd broken the sod with a team of horses and a stubbornness Walt had inherited whole. The debt at the bank wasn't reckless. It was seed money and repairs, and a truck engine rebuild. The ordinary costs of an ordinary year, the kind that wheat always paid back with room to spare. But 1959 hadn't been ordinary. The rain was coming too soon. The wife who'd carried half the work was gone, and a body that once could go soon up to sundown now needed rest by early afternoon. None of that mattered to the wheat. It didn't know about grief or bad knees or bank drafts. It only knew it was ready, and that a field has never once waited on a man to feel prepared to save it. At 9 that morning, a dust-colored Buick came rolling up the section road. A man stepped out in a pressed suit that had no business being in a wheat field, carrying a leather folder instead of a clipboard, but the effect was the same. He didn't remove his hat either. He worked for the loan office out of Hays, and he'd come to look over the land the way a buyer inspects something he already half owns. "Mr. Reyes," he said, checking his folder. "Payments due Thursday, $2,200. "I'm aware," Walt said, "that's a considerable amount of wheat to bring in alone in 2 days." Walt looked at the gold stretching in every direction, then past it to the bruised gray building on the western horizon. "The bank's prepared to accept the quarter section instead, if it comes to that. Save everybody the trouble." Walt didn't answer because there wasn't an answer worth giving. The man wasn't unkind, that was almost the hardest part. He was simply a man doing arithmetic for a company, and it happened to be the exact same arithmetic Walt had already worked out alone before breakfast. One man, 35 acres, 2 days. A storm rolling in. It failed no matter who did the sum. The lone man made a note in his folder. He'd watched this exact scene unfold 100 times in 100 fields, and he could recognize the particular look of a thing already decided. Across the road, parked at the single pump of the local filling station, a broad-shouldered man in a chambray work shirt was finishing a bottle of root beer and taking in the whole scene without seeming to. He wasn't from Kansas. He was hauling a horse trailer back to his ranch outside Bakersfield after a cattle auction in Kansas City, and he'd only stopped for gas, a cold drink, and a chance to stretch legs that had been folded into a truck cab too long. His face happened to be playing on a movie house marquee 2 towns over that same week, a western called Ridgeline, the kind of picture where he rode in at the last minute and set things right. Walt Reyes had never once bought a ticket to a moving picture in his life, and wouldn't have known that face from any other stranger passing through on his way west. The man at the pump watched the suit fold himself back into the Buick. He watched the old farmer standing motionless in his own wheat like a man already grieving something that hadn't happened yet. He recognized that math too. He'd grown up around enough dryland farms to know exactly what 2 days, one back and a coming storm added up to. He could have finished his drink, climbed back into his truck, and been past the Colorado line before dark, and not one soul would have ever known he'd driven through. Tell me where you're watching this from. Drop your state or your country below, because I want to know exactly how far this one travels. Instead, he set the empty bottle down on the station rail. He crossed the road on foot, dust rising white and shimmering with heat around his boots. He stopped at the fence line where Walt was running a whetstone along the binder's dull sickle blade. "That the whole crew you've got?" Walt didn't look up right away. "That's the whole crew there is. When's it due?" "Thursday." The stranger studied the field, then the darkening sky behind it. He unbuttoned his good shirt, hung it over a fence post, and rolled the sleeves of the undershirt beneath to his elbows. "Well then," he said, "let's get to it." Walt had lived 6 decades and learned that men who stop at a fence line are usually there to talk, ask questions, offer sympathy, and nothing more. This one didn't say another word. He climbed straight into the standing wheat and started pitching bundles like he'd done it every summer of his life. And within the hour, Walt stopped wondering who the man was, because there was no spare breath left for wondering about anything. They worked. The sun climbed high and merciless with not one tree's worth of shade across the whole quarter section. The old binder cut and bound and dropped its bundles in a steady rhythm, and the 2 men stacked them into shocks, heads up, 10 to a stack. The same method Walt's father had used and his father before him, because that was simply how it was done when a man couldn't afford anything with an engine bigger than a truck's. The stranger's hands weren't soft. Years of rope burns and branding iron heat had seen to that. But this wasn't studio work with breaks between takes and someone standing by with water. By midday, new blisters had split open across his palms, and he wrapped them in a strip torn from his undershirt hem and kept right on working without a word about it. Walt noticed the fabric darkening red and said nothing either, because a man who has come to help doesn't want to be reminded of the cost of it. Walt took over driving the truck while the stranger loaded, swinging bundles up and over the side rail in one smooth motion after another. The gold pile growing steadily against the rust-colored bed, sweat and chaff turning his shirt the color of the field itself. Around noon, 3 boys came riding bicycles out from the direction of the filling station. Word travels fast in a county with 1 gas pump. They didn't ask for an autograph. They didn't ask for a photograph. They climbed straight into the stubble and started stacking shocks because something rare was happening on that farm, and they wanted their hands to have been part of it. When they told the story later in life, the stranger put them to work without any fuss or ceremony. The same way you'd put anyone willing to a task, and that, more than anything, is what those boys would remember for the rest of their lives. He never once treated them like spectators. He treated them like crew. By nightfall, the first 15 acres lay cut and shocked, and the storm had closed to a day and a half out. The stranger drank 3 dippers of water straight from the well pump and refused to sit down, because he understood that if he sat, the tired old man beside him would sit too, and a man that exhausted doesn't always find his way back up again. So Walt didn't sit either. They stood together in the cooling evening light, surveying what was finished and what remained, and neither one spoke the number out loud. The lone man's Buick returned the following morning. He stopped it at the roadside and looked out at rows of standing shocks where the day before there had only been uncut grain. He looked at the stranger up on the truck bed, sleeves still rolled, shirt dark with sweat, throwing bundles without pause. Something in his expression shifted, recognition maybe, though he never said whose face it was. He thought he knew. He stood by his car a long while, folder hanging loose at his side, and this time he wrote down nothing at all. "This doesn't change what's owed," he called out finally. "Wheat's still got to be cut, threshed, hauled, and weighed at the elevator before Thursday noon." The stranger never broke his rhythm. "Heard you the first time. Have you ever had someone step into your life at the exact moment you'd run clean out of road, not to fix everything for you, just to take up the other end of the load? It changes something in a person, it really does." The second day brought heat with no wind at all, the kind that settles over a field and simply refuses to lift. They worked the back acreage where the ground rolled and the old binder strained against the incline. The stranger never slowed. He'd found the rhythm of the work by then. Cut, bind, stack, load, repeat. And that rhythm became the only mercy available to either of them in that kind of heat, so he held onto it like a rope. Around 2 in the afternoon, the binder's drive chain snapped. Walt dropped to his knees to rethread it, and his hands trembled. They'd been trembling on and off since Martha's passing, a small private thing he usually hid at the supper table when someone sat across from him to hide it from. There was no one across from him anymore. The chain slipped through his shaking fingers twice before the stranger knelt down beside him and simply took it from his hands, no words exchanged. In that particular way, a person can take something from you so it becomes help instead of pity. He threaded it himself, and they went right back to work. They never spoke about Martha directly. A man doesn't hand that kind of grief to a stranger in the middle of a field. But when Walt's gaze lingered too long on the empty truck seat, the stranger noticed and understood exactly what he was looking at, because he'd buried people of his own.
"Bet she drove smoother than you do," he said.
And Walt laughed, a short, cracked, unpracticed sound. The first laugh that had escaped him since March, surprising even himself before the grief could catch up and stop it. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to him in 5 months, and it landed exactly because it wasn't gentle. It was simply true. She had driven smoother. The stranger understood that the only thing worth saying was the honest thing. So he said it, and then went right back to throwing wheat like nothing had passed between them at all. By dark on the second day, every acre stood in shocks across the whole quarter section, gold catching the last of the light, the storm now less than a day away. Thursday morning they threshed. A neighbor hauled over his old thresher behind a tractor before sunrise, one of the last working separators left in that part of the county, and they rigged the belt and started feeding shocks into the machine. The 3 boys came back. 2 more neighboring families showed up with their own trucks, because that was simply what neighbors did in that place, in that year. Grain poured steadily from the spout into truck beds, while straw blew out behind in a long golden plume, and the stranger stood in the chaff and heat, feeding buttles into the thresher hour after hour without once breaking rhythm. Dark clouds were building now in the west, the first real wind moving low through the stubble. There was nothing left standing for it to flatten. They'd beaten it. 2 tired backs, 3 boys, 2 neighboring families, and 1 aging machine working together against a sky that had nearly won. They hauled the threshed grain into the co-op elevator in town, load after load down the dirt road and onto the highway, and the stranger rode in on every single trip. Townsfolk paused on the sidewalk to watch the trucks pass. A few of them had seen Ridgeline playing at the picture house that very week. They looked at the man riding in the grain truck, looked again, decided their eyes were playing tricks, and went on with their day. That was exactly how he wanted it. The elevator operator ran the grain through the grater twice to be certain of what he was seeing. Number 1 hard red winter wheat, dry, clean, full test weight. He wrote out the ticket. Walt Reyes's wheat, off Walt Reyes's own land, cut by Walt Reyes's own machine, total $2,610. The note was $2,200. Walt paid the loan office at 10:30 that morning, an hour and a half before the noon deadline, in cash straight off his own harvest. The loan man accepted the payment and wrote "paid in full" across the bottom of the note, his handwriting noticeably less steady than it had been 2 days before. He got back in his Buick, drove toward Hayes, and never once looked back at that field. The stranger could have written a check the very first morning. He'd had the money on him the whole time. He could have made this entire ordeal disappear before lunch and been 3 states away by nightfall. But a check would have made it his farm. One he'd simply handed back. Sweat made it stay Walt's farm, the one he'd kept with his own 2 hands. The stranger understood the difference clearly, and it's the whole reason for everything that followed. That's the why behind all of it. The rain arrived Thursday night, hard and steady and unbroken until morning. The kind that would have shattered every head of wheat still standing in that field, if there had been anything left standing at all. There wasn't. It was all sitting safely in the elevator, graded, sold, paid for in full. Saturday, at first light, the stranger's truck and horse trailer were gone from the filling station. He'd left before sunrise. No name left behind, no number to call. Walt walked out to his barn that morning to begin the day's chores and found, hanging from a nail by the hayloft ladder right where a working man leaves his things at the close of a job, a pair of leather work gloves worn clean through at the palms, and a single sweat-stained felt hat. The stranger had driven 300 miles bareheaded rather than knock on a grieving man's door just to reclaim a hat. 40 years passed. It's 1999. Now the Reyes place still stands in Ellis County. Walt's granddaughter runs the operation these days, and every July that home quarter section still goes into wheat because the family has never once considered putting it to anything else. The farmhouse has fresh paint. The barn is the same faded red it's always been, and inside that barn on the same nail by the same loft ladder hangs a pair of leather gloves worn through at the palms and one sweat-darkened felt hat. Nobody in that family has ever moved them, not once in 4 decades. When visitors ask about them, Walt's granddaughter tells the story exactly the way her grandfather told it to her. And then she tells them the part her grandfather only discovered years later. Once the hat had gone soft with age, and he finally turned down the sweatband to look inside. 2 letters penciled faintly into the leather, nearly worn away. J.C. Walt Reyes never once sat in a movie house in his life. It took years before a traveling salesman happened to spot those gloves hanging on the nail, asked about them out of idle curiosity, and went quiet when he realized whose hands might have once filled them. 3 days, sun up to dark, 35 acres of cutting, stacking, threshing, hauling, and grading, all of it carried out by a man who had absolutely no obligation to lift a single bundle for a grieving widower he'd never laid eyes on before in a county he was only ever supposed to be passing through. He never once reached for his checkbook, though it sat the whole time in his coat pocket, and he could have ended the entire crisis before the first day's lunch break. Instead, he gave something that couldn't be repaid and couldn't ever be claimed as his own. The labor of his own 2 hands, offered at the single moment a man truly could not have managed alone. And then, before the sun came up, he drove 300 miles bareheaded so that no one could ever properly thank him, and so the farm would remain fully and only the farm of the man who'd worked it. How many quiet mornings like that one do you think happened across this country in counties nobody ever wrote down? How many barns still have a nail somewhere with something hanging from it, and a family that has simply never been able to bring themselves to move it? If this one found you today, do something with it, pass it along. Send it to a farmer you know, a veteran, anyone in your life who's ever had to carry a hard season alone. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because there are more stories like this one coming.